Hello, everyone, and welcome back. I'm on today with the fabulous RJ Downard, and we're going to talk about paleontology for the most part, and probably some other things as we tend to get off topic and cover a large range of topics. So,
we'll talk about Donald Prothero, who was to be the guest, not me.
yeah, we might get him on later. We'll see what happens. Okay. So Donald Prothero is a paleontologist, and he has some really interesting work. In the description, I linked his book and my favorite article penned by him. His book is titled Evolution, What the Fossils Say and Why It Matters, which has received quite a lot of positive attention from scientists and non-scientists. So what did they know? And his article titled Stephen Meyer's Fumbling, Bumbling, Amateur Cambrian Follies is a response to Stephen Meyer's book. It was his first book, Stephen Meyer's first book. I can't remember the name.
No, actually, second, Darwin's Doubt, I think.
Was it Darwin's Doubt? Okay, that might have been it.
Yeah, his first book was on the signature in the cell.
No,
both of them are like 500-page long steroidal versions of intelligent design talking points.
Yeah, it's but the review is actually very good. And after he wrote the review, interestingly, he got almost 2,000 responses from people, and so 70% of the people who responded to him gave him a positive review on the article, and it was just to Meyer's book. Just absolutely destroyed the book because Myers tripped over every single topic that he covered, from the molecular biology to the paleontology. It was just a mess. So
Prothero is a fun one, and the neat thing, I can heartily recommend his book on evolution, why the fossils and why it matters. It's a wonderful compendium. I think it's about 7 or 8 years old now, but still, it's quite a good work. Well illustrated. It covers all the basics to give you a good sense. There's a section on the reptile-mammal transition that's quite nice. I think there's stuff on punctuated equilibrium and the philosophy and that of it. It's not so much a response to creationism view, is just purely a discussion of why the evolution is suggested by the data. And so it's a nice one to have in your library.
Yeah, absolutely. I have not read his book, but I really do. I would like to, but at the same time, I have so many books on vertebrate paleontology and other scientific topics to read. So I've got a ways to go. There's actually one of the last books, or actually two of the last books I have in my stack are, one is titled The Tyrannosaur Chronicles, which should be very interesting. It's a whole book just on Tyrannosaur phylogeny and behavior and whatnot. And interesting because the last book I read that was just about dinosaurs was by Darren Naish. His book was titled Dinosaurs or something like that.
He's a neat illustrator.
Yeah, How They Lived and Evolved. It was a very good book. I liked it a lot. And and so the last book I have in my stack is The War on Science by Otto something or something Otto. I can't remember his name. But I think a lot of it is about postmodernism and
yes, the venereal disease of modern
Sean
philosophy.
Otto, there we go. Sean Otto. Yeah, it's a lot of it's on postmodernism, how is an expert on every topic now. And it looks very interesting. I'm sure it's going to be the kind of book that makes me mad while I read it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, postmodernism bumps into intelligent design thinking, because in many respects they function in a postmodernist mode of where data doesn't really mean anything, that it's only because of your different worldview or your philosophy that causes you to believe what you do. And that is an insidious little thing, when in fact it's always the data that needs to matter. And if you can't explain the data, then get out of the room.
Yeah, postmodernism I have to say, yeah, there we go. Sean Lawrence Otto. Yeah, that's it. I have to say, I fell prey, I think, to a little bit of postmodernism in high school, but once I actually started thinking about it, I got rid of it kind of quickly. I mean, some of the ideas seem, yeah, solipsistic individualism at its core, Paranor. Yes, very true.
Yeah, the
I
one
think it's
area where
kind of
that
interesting.
philosophical, oh God, I'm trying to think of the name of the Derrida and others, they were legitimately calling attention to the idea that people's cultural frame does affect how they think about data.
Yes. Mhm.
And that's like a duh. Of course they do. And I already was aware of this from my history end, because historiography, one of the big areas that I did in college, is study of how history has changed over time. You're looking at the difference between how a Gibbon is looking at the Roman Empire in 1800 in the 18th century, and that versus how somebody in the 1930s is looking at it. And they feed their own worldview and their own expectations into their attitudes about the culture. And you can't avoid that. But ultimately, really good history and really good science and rigorous thinking steps past all of that, recognizes the baggage, kind of puts it to the side, and tries to structure things where you're actually trying to account for the data itself. And in that respect, then, we're postmodernist when
Mhm.
you look at things from a methods direction.
Yeah. It. Uh-oh.
We have dead air
Can
time.
Oh, can you hear me? Okay.
Oh, yeah, I
You
can still
dropped
hear
off for
you.
a second there.
Oh, well, no, I just fell silent. I know this is an unusual phenomenon for me, but nevertheless, that's the way it happens. Yes, it'd probably be more easy if I had the camera on, but I've all bundled up here for the cold, and so I would look pathetic, and we'll just avoid that. But yeah,
The
but back to Prothero.
Yeah.
Prothero, his work on mammal evolution is really relevant, and he does
Mm.
bump into some of the questions that I wanted you to discuss with Robert, related to how his stuff bumped into creationism. And of course, you already mentioned the neat piece on the Cambrian and his review of Steve Meyer, but he also gets raked over the coals by a lot of intelligent design people, and so to some extent, some young Earth creationists who object to his insisting that there are in fact transitional fossils. Sorry. And the intelligent designers went into the idea that Prothero was somehow not recognizing that fossil stasis was a reality and that this was somehow anti-evolutionary. And I put up a link to you from my tip 1.3, where I'd gone into how the intelligent designers mangled his work on that aspect. And anybody who wants to look at that can plow ahead on that. But the neat thing of it is that Prothero has played the role where, because he knows the paleontology, he's able to dive in on this from his own data set, as opposed to coming at it from a philosophical end, which is the way some of the other people may be coming into it, or areas that are kind of outside their discipline. And that's a really valuable thing, because most of the paleontologists do their work, and they once in a while come in. Kevin Padian testified at Dover, for example, in the Kitzmiller trial. But by and large, the paleontologists are too busy doing their shtick to get involved with that. So Paul Sereno and
Yeah.
others, they're not paying any attention at all to anti-evolutionism. And so Prothero gets props for sticking his foot in on that, to show, hey, wait a minute, we've got all this data, and don't try to pretend we don't.
Oh, speaking of data creationists are trying to pretend we don't have, let's talk about our two conversations we've had over the past 2 days.
Oh, yes, yes, just today,
We
in fact. Go back in the earlier one first.
Yeah, so we had, as well as a few other people, we had a conversation, because we were clued into this by Tony, Hack and Slash, and so he was having an argument with these two guys, these two creationists named John Eller and David Hicks, and so we kind of came in.
The tag team of dumb.
Yeah, we kind of came in later, and we roasted John Eller, and then interestingly, Atheist Engineer came in. That guy has a whole lot of followers. and was also part of the attack on Eller. And so we just beat him around for a little while, and then he blocked all of us last night.
Yeah, I don't know that he's blocked me, but I know he disengaged in a hurry. That's the first opportunity of a scoundrel or an idiot. Because if you don't actually know your material, you can't defend it. And so the only thing you can do is just block and run away and try to find a venue where you can spout all of your stuff. But he was operating as a really superficial level, as I think was pretty obvious from all the people engaging him. And then there was Hicks. Oh, glorious Hicks.
Yeah, he was even worse, I think, because he practically admitted to us that he didn't care if his source was wrong. I told him, what if I can prove that your source is wrong? And he said, I won't lose any sleep over it.
Yeah, well, that's easily done. It shows you how tactical and silly the fellow was. Well, one of the things that it took me a while on both of them was to pry loose where they were on chronology, whether they were young Earth creationists or not. And finally, Hicks was starting to come clean about it, which, of course, allows me to put it onto a boundary layer. To be able to measure him. But he walked into a glorious trap. I immediately thought of Huxley's old thing, the Lord hath delivered him unto my hands, because just today he put up a link to an old David Menton article that Answers in Genesis had on speciation, which, by the way, I didn't have in my bibliography before, so I'm actually going to be putting that in. But the article happened to be framed with a picture from the Creation Museum, which is a little a creationist flood geology image that was also used in the Ken Ham Bill Nye debate happened to show a triceratops. It's a graphic from the museum, and it shows a bunch of different animals. I think 7 or 8 different kinds, all shown by little icons. And they have a dinosaur on there, triceratops. That's their one and only. And
got to get the kids.
This cute little graphic of the little squiggly lines, and then there's a line across the chart which shows the flood.
The flood boundary.
And then there's the point is there were a bunch of little lines squiggling off from the triceratops after the flood for a while. And of course, that would have been 4,500 years ago. Well, that one is a colossal opening, because first of all, no creationist has ever actually thought through the ceratopsids in terms of their own baromonology and the psittacosaurids and the protoceratopsids. We've got a huge amount of paleontology on this, and no creationist has ever tried to show that any ceratopsids existed after the flood, or where would they have been but in Asia. And that's exactly where you don't find any fossils or any indication that there were ever these things, because they're all in North America. So it's just an incredible bollocks. And I started off by asking David the terrible question of, oh, would you mind explaining what you think those squiggly lines mean on those in the protoceratops, or in the ceratopsid there? Explain what you think it means. Explain how it relates to your ideas. Well, oh, how nasty of me to actually ask him to explain what he thinks about a subject that he brought up.
Oh, he vanished. He is gone.
Oh, there was nothing he could say. Because nobody has ever explained what any of those damn lines mean at Answers in Genesis, and he can't wing it on his own if he knows nothing about the subject, which I suspected he did. So he just kept on bouncing, repeating the same thing, where he says, well, will you answer my question? Yeah, well, the question we already answered about the, I think he tossed off several of them in the course of it. And then I finally got snarkier and said, is it only your questions that get to be answered, and you never want to answer any of our questions, like the ones asking about the source you brought up?
I feel like I was maybe a little too snarky at one point. I don't know. I'll see what you guys think. He said with him it was okay. Oh, you know what I'm talking about? You know what I'm talking about? Okay, so I said to him, oh no, he said to me first, I've been in school longer than you've been alive. And so I responded to that with, look, however long it takes you to get your art degree is your business, not judging.
Oh, I was just as bad, because I said, all this education you've had, it obviously hasn't took yet. All of this time it hasn't taken. That if you're paying money for this, please get a refund fast. So
yeah, it's
no,
well, he was also he was snarky towards us.
Got like 17 followers or something like that. He's, you know, he's not exactly a
He
live wire.
has
Has no
16 followers.
information on his page to indicate where he's coming from anything. Doesn't even have a picture. I mean, I have my mug up. So anybody that sees me on Twitter sees my ugly mug up there. I'm not hiding myself. I'm not concealing who I am. I'm not pretending I'm somebody else. I'm not using anything as a sock puppet account, which some of these people do, where they'll jump from one thing to another.
Oh yeah,
yikes.
like Walter.
Well, the notorious one here is Henzo, if you're familiar with him.
Yes, I have actually. I had a run-in with him a long time ago.
Homophobic jerk, and he has gone through literally dozens of different nom de plumes. People will report him for nasty, abusive tweets, and then he'll create a new one. And so I've kept track, and various of us on Twitter have actually kept track of the different names he uses over the years as he moves from one thing. But he has the same core address in the tweeter thing, and that's how you can track down where he's coming from, because it's the same core. And there's a couple people on there that go through these nom de plumes, where they come in, and as soon as they start hitting the fan, where they're way out of their depth, they'll go off, and then they'll create a new one. But it's got the same core address, so you can tell it's same person. And you're not getting any better the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth time around.
Yeah, I had one conversation with him, like over a year ago, maybe over 2 years ago, and we were arguing about something or other. And then I saw him again a little more recently, or a lot more recently. He was talking to somebody else, and I don't remember if I said anything to him, but I remember thinking, wow, that name is very similar to one I'd seen before. And so yeah, but Walter was the same. He you said he had like what, 3 or 4 names prior to Walter?
Yeah, the ones that do this will do it as a regular routine, because what will happen is they will bump into, we have Headless Chicken.
Hey,
they'll get this matter where they'll be hit with a ton of bricks, and they'll run away. They won't block you. They'll just create a new nom de plume, and then they can come back in and spout all of the same stuff. It's a different thing. They're very unoriginal. At least there's a certain weird honesty to somebody like Preacher, who spews the same routines over and over and over again, but he does it under the same name, so at least he's honest.
Yeah, I mean, Walter was, or is, a nurse, I think is what he said, and so he kept coming at me with, I have knowledge of biology because I'm a nurse. Well, you know, I mean, I'm not doubting that he does. Of course he does. It was more like genetics. It's more, he's saying, I have knowledge. I know what I'm talking about because I'm a nurse, even though being a nurse doesn't necessitate that he knows much about genetics, which is what Huffman did.
In fact, even being
Huffman
a medical
did the same
doctor,
thing.
or a surgeon, as Ben Carson amply demonstrates, that you don't necessarily know diddly squat about areas outside of your technical discipline, even if you are perfectly competent within your technical discipline.
Yeah, and Huffman was like that too when I first ran into him somehow or another, which is how I met Peter and all the others, because we were having a discussion about mutations. I saw him say that de novo mutations don't exist, so I sent him a paper on multiple lineages of garter snakes developing de novo mutations to eat this. Their
we
prey
don't have
was
to
this,
guess at it. We have the technical literature.
Yeah, the prey was this venomous Tarika salamander, and so each of these lineages developed independent de novo mutations to consume the salamander. And so he said, and I think he looked at it, because he came back with, this says they acquired it, the de novo mutation. I said, yes, that's how you get mutations. What do you think
acquire it.
happened?
It wasn't there before, and now it is there, and it's occurred recently and observably, and so forth and so on. Yeah, there's a bunch of litmus test issues that I track in #tip. One of them is point mutations. So I'm always looking at things where diseases are caused by individual point mutations, or novel features are caused by individual mutations, either amino acid substitutions or literally nucleotide single point mutations. Sickle cell anemia falls into that category, and so too is the thing on the fish antifreeze. that it's very precise point mutations. It's not some complicated multiple layers of things happening to happen all at once. It's just one little switch, boop, and you got a new function. And so I pay attention to that. And then the other ones I look at in young Earth creationism is interbedded airborne volcanic ash and aeolian windblown deposits. Those are all things that are physically impossible in the flood. So I'm always keeping my eye out for those in the paleontological record. And when you get a lot of these, then you build up a repertoire of stuff that can't exist in their framework and yet does. And that's something you want to mention to them.
Yeah, of course, they're unaware of the vast majority of these things. They have no clue what an aeolian layer is most of the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
they don't know about a formation, about the fragile formations, which, I mean, it's like putting a tornado in a room and expecting it to make a china plate. I mean,
mm-hmm.
you know, no.
Yeah, well, that's why probing the source. When anybody is skirting past information like that, you want to probe their source base, not merely show your own source base, but probe theirs, and that will help reveal, not to them because they're Tortukans, they're never going to change their mind, but as a way for anybody that's observing this as a form of scholarly theater, can see you presenting information and you trying to pin the other person down on their lack of information, and that's all going to be visible. Everyone can see it.
Peter, what do you think? Pseudo, what are your thoughts, guys?
I was a little bit distracted by the chat. I was looking at the wrong screen, so I didn't see your question there in the chat. So, good evening, everybody.
We have the
you mentioned Hoffman
on today,
yes,
as well.
You mentioned Hoffman, and RJ debated him.
Yeah, I saw that.
And he's been on the run since then because I've
been waiting for second installment. He put the kid to bed, and we haven't heard a word out of him since.
Well, I had an agreement. I had an agreement with him. I was the first one he wanted to come on with in August, and then I was very surprised to see him do a debate with you when he actually promised me that weekend, and then I failed to respond to a suggestion he made, and I don't know what happens. Maybe he's mad or just scared or.
Well, for me, the moment of beauty was when I asked him, did he fact check his sources? And there was this huge, perfect, classic deer in the headlight, brain not working look on his face. That was exactly what I was expecting a Tortukan to do, because of course I knew he'd never done that, and he just didn't realize that this was a problem.
Perfect blank stare. I remember it because I was watching at the moment. It was great. Yeah, so I don't know what happened, why he dropped off. I don't see him on Twitter.
RJ had him running for the hills.
Yeah.
Source methods is a game Tortukans can't play. I keep on reminding people of it, that it's something where they're just bad at playing the game. It's their brains don't do that at all. It literally doesn't occur to them to differentiate primary and secondary sources. It literally doesn't occur to them to source check. All they're looking for is ammunition. All they're looking for is things to reinforce the objects of desire, their dogma, and that's it. And no matter how bright they are, they'll start showing these bad methods traits the moment that they're in their Tortukan ruts.
Yeah, Karis and I did a show on how to approach young Earth creationists or fundamentalists or whatever. It's also something that they are taught. It's there are certain how do you call that? Certain words they look for, certain sentences they look for, and then automatically the defense comes up because they're taught to defend themselves against people coming up with that. And so I'm pretty hooked on channels like I forgot. Beach is in the comments. Beach, help me out. Cordial something. I
you're
keep
right.
forgetting his name.
You're right, Peter. It happen. It doesn't just happen with like talking to them on the street, like the street preachers and whatnot. They teach kids to do it in schools.
Yeah.
So that when they go to biology or chemistry or geology or something like that, and the teacher brings up some topic like, if you take high school chemistry, you're going to be taught about rates of decay, because it's not a debated subject. You have to do, and if you take pre-calculus, it's likely you'll encounter rates of decay also. And so it's not a thing that anyone's really debating, I don't think. It's pretty set out. I mean, you're doing it in high school, and so they're just trained that when they hear rate of decay or something like that, they have a phrase, that they're going to shout, like, oh, evolution is just a theory, right? You weren't there, you didn't see rates of decay.
Yeah, but it's
like that.
It's the other way around as well. And I have to thank BJ, because BJ is always a great help when she's around. So Cardial Curiosity and Anthony Magnabusco, they use the street epistemology.
Oh yeah, I like him.
And the way they do it and the way they ask questions, they can penetrate what the fundamentalists are taught to have as their defense. And it's non-threatening, it's not aggressive, but it's a way you can actually have them think about their own convictions. But if you do it right, they'll be open to hear your side of the case. And I think that's something that we should take advantage of what those guys are doing, because they're doing amazing work. And they can do it in a way where the person they're interviewing actually asks for the other side.
Yeah,
and
I would suspect in those cases they're non-Tortukans, so somebody that's been raised in a framework.
No. The opposite, James. It's and I'm not trying to bash you here, but if you say Tortukan, a lot of people will see your videos and will see how you talk about them. And that's also something that's damaging you when you have an actual conversation with someone, because they'll watch your videos and it works against you. I was aggressive too, and I had pretty much the same way of interacting as you have, James. But I changed, because I think we can do a lot more if we change our approach. If we really want to bring the facts to them, then you have to make them ask for the facts, because that's the point where they want to listen to you.
Well, they also, the facts, I think so, they also kind of preempt some of the responses, and they'll wait for you to say your key phrase where they can throw in their because
that's what they are taught. They are taught that in churches or in some kind of meetings, and people like Answers in Genesis and Ray Comfort, for instance, they take advantage of that by sending their materials to churches and prepping people, as it were, for questions and for putting up a wall when evidence is presented. So, to me, still the way that I think Anthony Magnabusco was one of the first, and he's perfect, but
street epistemology, that's what it's called, isn't it?
Yeah. And Cardial Curiosity as well. He's amazing. And if you see what results they get, then we're doing it completely wrong.
Well, the issue I was bringing up about Tortukan is different from my personal style. What I was simply saying is that some of the people that you would be encountering in a street epistemology context may or may not be Tortukans. They may be people raised in the background. They've learned all the skill set. They've learned the apologetic arguments. If they, however, have a fundamentally Tortukan mind, it won't matter how you approach them or in what mechanism or what ways, you're never going to be able to get them off of something that they want to be true, because their mind is impervious to that methodologically.
You guys, did you guys see the video? R and Raw actually went and did the street epistemology with Anthony, and my favorite comment from that was having R and Raw talk to these guys is like using a flamethrower to light a cigarette.
Yeah, it was pretty much. It was. I thought it was hilarious because you can't ask Aaron to stop presenting what he knows, and so yeah, to me it was great. It was great, but at least he tried it, and he picked up a couple of things. If you watch his interviews now, you'll see a difference in approach.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, with Aaron, I think it seems more that he's like letting them ask questions, and he has a lot of patience. That guy has a whole lot of patience.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah,
especially with the incident on my channel.
Well, what was the incident?
Good old Mr. Intelligent Design.
Oh.
Mr. ID.
How many shits of paper did he get through?
Oh,
9 shits. 9 shits.
9 shits?
9 shits.
Still receive messages on that video from people who are saying that. Like I think maybe every other day I receive a message, someone saying how many pieces of tissue paper he's dropped an egg through.
No, not tissue paper. Shits. How many shits of paper?
How many shits?
Shits. 9 shits.
Yeah, Edgar is a one-act pony. In 5 minutes, you will hear everything that you will ever hear from Edgar on any subject whatsoever. That's his game.
Yeah.
And you can never move past him on it. There's no there.
Yeah,
but it took 40 minutes for Ken Hovind to leave.
Yeah, I watched that, and Hovind just kind of dropped off and never came back.
Hovind said he understood Edgar, however, which is a hilarious admission to go. And the one minor detail that was relevant is that it does in fact sound like Edgar is agreeing in the flood and young earth creationism. So even though he's never discussed that in other contexts with Kent, he was perfectly happy to say that. So whether he was being dissembling, I was much more thinking that he was just being honest, that he is a young earth creationist, but he doesn't use that in his arguments and dresses it up in a different frame. And the shits.
I loved it how they started off with the prayer.
Oh yeah.
because
you get that in intelligent design stuff at churches.
Wait.
But Ken Hovind never starts that way.
No, but
Edgar just asked him.
Yes, but to me, that's the perfect example that prayer doesn't work, because Hovind ends up running away. So if prayer should have worked, they should have had a meaningful conversation. And I think about everything went wrong in that conversation.
Oh, by the way, go ahead.
And when James, when you said the deer in the headlight look, Hovind had that for the full time that he was on.
Yeah, there were times when he was waiting for something that he could put his hooks into, and occasionally Edgar would veer into something that was more standard apologetics, and then he could kind of lump in with his talking points, but then he would let Edgar talk again, and then the train was off again.
Yeah, he was just kind of watching with... It was kind of the way that Bill Nye looked at Ken Ham after the debate, just kind of a vague wondering of what's going on in the other person's mind. But also, fun fact about Hovind, tomorrow night I should be having Robert Beatty on my channel, and we're going to discuss some of Hovind's financial dealings, and that should be fun. It'll be an interesting talk, I think.
Yeah, I'll watch.
So you have that to look forward to tomorrow.
Yes.
And then theoretically, we should have a philosopher of science on Monday, and so that's what's coming up in the near future. So we'll see how that goes. We'll see how all that works out. I think I'll actually have to do the interview with the philosopher of science on a camera that we'll probably have to rent, so that one won't be live, I don't think. I'll just upload it. So you guys have that to look forward to. So if anyone has any questions for him, send those to me and I can ask him. Because I'm very interested to talk. I don't usually do talks about philosophy, but I think philosophy is an interesting subject, although it's one I think I typically stay away from.
I think I would too. I'm not sure if I'm that qualified.
Yeah, I know how you feel. When I did my talk with Tony, as RJ knows, I was kind of shying away from philosophy.
Yeah, Tony does that to you. But also Tony's easy to talk to, so that
definitely.
helps.
Yeah,
That
absolutely. I wish I could only see him talk to Charlie Kennan in person. Do what?
Yeah, I still have to get back in touch with Hovind, because he wanted to debate Hovind as well, and he wanted me to host that, and I want a rematch with Hovind. So, but I'm currently waiting for Eric Hernandez, because he sounds interesting as well with his new book.
A new book? What's it about?
A new book.
You said it's about atheism, right? Or why it's
Yeah.
wrong?
And it has a subtitle which is I think 1.5 pages long, insulting everything and everybody in atheism. That's just a subtitle. And what follows is the biggest load of nonsense you've ever heard, because
Which is?
Try
us.
That thoughts are a gift of God.
Oh, that's
and
right.
Mind is a gift of God, because a mind and a thought don't weigh the same as a brain, which is perfectly logical in his mind. So whoever gave him that mind should be punished. I think.
I've heard
Needless
arguments.
to say, I doubt he will be contributing much to our current knowledge of neuroscience.
I think that is very fair to say. I also think I've heard things along the same line. One of the common apologetic arguments is that immaterial things like thoughts and laws exist, even though laws are thoughts. Therefore, since these immaterial things exist, there must be an immaterial God who bestowed these upon us. Although, how does that argument? It has kind of a nice sounding symmetry to it, but how does that argument work for material things? Is there a material God who made the material things and an immaterial God who made the immaterial things?
I don't know. I have been thinking about this, but if what they always say is God is outside of time and space. So if God is outside of time and space, he doesn't take up space, and he exists for literally 0 seconds. Because
if
there's
for 0 seconds,
if he's outside of time, then he can't exist for a period of time. So that makes him non-existent. Or am I thinking wrong here? Because I've been trying to figure that one out.
We're getting into the of the zebra crossing incident in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy about proving and disproving God. We're getting some interesting comments here. Of idle comment talking about Eric or Kent, either Kent or Eric, one of the two, on was the false flag theory of the Vegas tragedy, that it was how disgusting all of that was.
This kind of thing happens every time there's a tragedy. It happened. The last big one was the Columbine shooting, where
no. Last
they
one
were
was
all
Vegas.
No, before Vegas. Before
Oh,
Vegas.
before that, it's the obvious thing that anything that goes wrong, Pat Robertson would see a hurricane hitting Florida. It must be because they have too many gays.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this has gone back a long time, all the way back to Jerry Falwell's era in the 1970s and 80s. This is not something new.
Well, then James, wait. Then how come San Francisco never gets hit?
Oh, my favorite joke about that is that the people after the San Francisco earthquake were saying that this was God's judgment on the sin city of San Francisco. And then somebody said, well, how come all the churches were destroyed, but the city's only distillery survived intact?
Yeah.
Hello? RJ?
Yeah, are you hearing me?
In that one, you have to do it again. Yeah, we can hear you now.
Was I bumping in and out?
Yeah,
I heard you fine.
After the San Francisco earthquake in 1906, some wags were insisting that this was God's judgment on San Francisco because of all of their supposed sinfulness. And someone in San Francisco replied, well, if that's true, how come all the churches were destroyed, but the city's only distillery survived intact?
Yeah. And if that's true, then why is Tornado Alley in the Bible Belt?
Yeah. See, this is the argument where people try to find symbolism in things. So they arbitrarily decide the thing they don't like is the object of it. They don't apply it in other areas. You could just as easily, argue that a disaster was because they'd installed direct dial telephones or something. It's just a meaningless correlations and connections that people do. And it tells you way more about their weird way of thinking than anything about meteorology or earthquake incidents.
Well, I always ask myself, if it's really God doing all this, then why do churches have lightning rods?
Yes, that's another one. Yes, or why is there a handicap parking in churches? Why haven't they miraculously healed all of this long ago? That would be really impressive evidence.
Yeah, well, I do have someone in mind now who tells me, I think at least one time a week, that people are getting healed, but it mysteriously it's only in Africa and only when no one is looking.
Yeah.
You can't.
It's like the Nostradamus people
in there either.
Nostradamus is always fabulously accurate up to the publication date of the book.
Yeah, well, this one just got my feathers in a ruffle, and I think to tweet this week, and people who are listening, it's because they're not going to be pretty. I'm going to get back.
This is a long fundamental issue. It long goes back into religion. The idea, why does God allow bad things to happen, and does God have a particular role in that? And the atheists will say, well, the reason why bad things happen is the luck of the draw, and there are no gods there to intervene one way or the other.
And a lot of bad things that happen are as a direct result of the Bible, the Quran, and the Torah. So,
yeah. That's when things get really dicey. That when somebody's being burned at the stake for being a heretic, that's kind of directly related to the religion notion. When they're chopping people's heads off because they don't follow the Quran, or throwing gays off the roof, that's kind of directly related to their religion.
Yeah, but they're nice people, apparently.
Well, most people are nice people. The amazing thing you have to remember is that the number of people who do nasty stuff relatively limited in number. What happens that allow other people to get involved in the fray is when the nasty people get in charge. So you ended up with the situation that most of the people who were guards at the Nazi death camps were part of the police system. They weren't part of the military or the SS. And so they were people who probably would have been perfectly benign in a benign culture, but now they're the ones doing the actual grunt work. And that's the case whenever you get dangerous Tortukans in charge, they can run off the rails. That's why you don't want them in charge, because they can drag more people with them.
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
I
Go ahead, Peter.
I still think that if and what this particular person told me is that people in Saudi Arabia are that nice. How come none of them are actually speaking up when people get their heads chopped off? And why don't they speak up when people are thrown off buildings? And what disturbed me the most is something that I think happened in 2015, but I recently just saw that, about a woman who was accused of burning a Quran, and she didn't. First of all, she didn't even do it, but the entire event, because it was an event, was filmed and was put together, where she first was beat up, then she was dragged into the street and the car drove over her, then she was dragged onto a beach and they set her on fire while still alive. And those are the nice people, because the police were there and did nothing. It was
that's another matter of how the state.
It was the people who did this. It was the people who did this. It wasn't a church. It wasn't some kind of authority. It was just people in the street doing this to a woman. And if you then go and say, well, but they're nice people.
They are not nice people. The issue is how we have a 1.6 billion Muslims. And I would contend that you would be hard-pressed to find more than 0.1% of them who fall into the scary watch out about category.
Yeah. So I got pretty disgusted about that. And I'm going to send out a couple of tweets which will be very graphic. But at least I'll warn people up front. Yeah, because it isn't that nice.
RJ, I was going to say, I just remembered now. My video on the reptile mammal evolution has hit 1,000 views now, believe it or not.
Yay!
And yet no one's leaving comments.
I've got quite a few where they don't leave comments as well.
Yeah.
To where are they just shocked that there's such
It's very
things?
frustrating to me.
Or they, that they're watching. Either they're going, even. Have you gotten likes in that? Have people clicked the like thing or dislike?
I mean, there are some likes, but there are only like 2 comments on it, I think, or something like that. It's very few comments, and yet over 1,000 views now. And so I don't. It's been slowly going up, which is the funny thing. It's been slowly rising the whole time. And
it could
I
be
just don't know
because
who's
of
watching
the novelty of it. The reptile mammal transition is not widely known, and so it's like, whoa, I haven't heard about that before, and they got to kind of let it steep a while, maybe.
I actually told a guy about it just this week, believe it or not, because I was waiting to get into English class. I'd gotten there early because Biolab let out early, and so I was reading your book, and he said, "What you reading?" And so I told him, reading a book about the reptile mammal transition, and he said, "Is that a thing in science?" And I said, "Yeah, mammals are descended from reptiles ultimately." And he just said, well, "Wow."
It's a slam dunk. And even some of the people in the field pointed out that it was not as widely known as it should be. Christine Janis was happy about the fact that I'd written the book, because although in their own field, they know what the data are, but they haven't really been all that great at presenting this to the outside world. And a lot of the reporters and people going on to this are kind of paying attention to dinosaurs and the ones that are the fancy stars, and they forget our end of it. That is spectacular in its own way, and everybody ought to know about it. I'll pull a shameless plug by putting the book title up in the chat there.
Yeah, we were talking about just a little while back. there were 3 genera of elephants in northeast Kenya. Northwest Kenya. Just northwest Kenya alone had 3 different genera of elephants in it. Was it the Miocene, I think?
Yeah, we're looking at a very impoverished biota just after the that brings back the whole question of somebody asking about mass extinction and the 6th extinction that somebody had asked
we
before
totally
the show
forgot
started. Maybe
to
we ought
answer that
to
one.
dive into that one because this is a perfect segue on there. That we know that there was a big drop-off of biota after the end of the Ice Age, and there's a big, still hot topic as to how much human involvement was in that. It's pretty clear when you look at one group after another, especially isolated islands, that basically when humans show up, the animals start dying off. But the question is why? And in part, it can be done to just the fact that we're a little better hunters than other predators are. So all you need to do in the case of elephants and others is just increase the number of babies that you're getting, and because they have such a long gestation period, it's suddenly the replacement rate drops below viability, and boop, it goes extinct without necessarily going to overkills, although there have been little bits of that. Now, regarding the current situation of are we artificially engineering a big crash and who is going to survive and what, that's an interesting question. I never underestimate the ability of human beings to survive under peculiar circumstances. I'm sure the cockroaches and the insects will make it. Only one of the mass extinctions bumped into them much at all, and that was the Permian, and that was the worst ever. So the insects will go through happy. All your bacteria and nematodes and all that kind of stuff.
There was a show. Yeah, there was a show. I think it was called like After Humans or something like that. It was a
that was
show
fascinating
on
stuff.
what would happen to different and architecture if humans just went extinct one day. And one of the
how quickly things
was like cats will become more like squirrels, or house cats become more like squirrels. It was very interesting. I only saw like one episode of it, but I thought it was very interesting.
They're useful shows even in the case of where obviously speculation is involved, but they're interesting thought experiments because you have to think about how species interact in an ecological framework and what happens when you remove an aspect of it. The other phrase I suppose we should comment on is keystone species. I'll put a little thing on in there so everybody can Google that. Keystone species are ones that are hypothesized, and in some cases they've been able to identify examples of ones when you have a whole ecological network of something that eats something else, and parasites are in there, and predator-prey relationships, and ultimately food down in the plant level and all that. They're all interconnected as a huge web, and there may be an individual species that if it goes extinct, everything connected to it's going to get screwed up. And that's one of the arguments as to what possibly can trigger mass extinction collapses, is that it isn't so much that all the dinosaurs died out, it's that all the keystone dinosaurs died out, and that everything else connected to it fell apart. Silence.
And then it would
James, there's a tree called the dodo tree. It's one of its names. I can't read the Latin name for it.
As opposed to the dodo bird.
Yeah. Well, the thing was, the dodo bird would eat would eat the fruit of the seeds. They would pass through the gut, and then they would germinate.
Oh, so it went because the dodos went.
Right.
Bingo. Well, and there's another thing where it involved seabirds and the guano that was used up on the shore and plants that were connected to it. And so I can't remember whether it was because they were overfishing down in the sea or whether they were bumping off the birds. But at any rate, they both started to collapse because of one of them going, because of how they were interconnected in so many different ways. And so the simple rule from an ecological perspective is nature has found a way to balance things out for good or ill. It's the way it is. And if you start arbitrarily interfering, you're not necessarily going to have good results from it. We've seen this in terms of when they decided to bring bunnies to Australia, and they went berserk and spread all over the place and created terrible problems for things. A lot of the areas that we see in the world are highly unnatural already. Almost nothing of the natural environment exists in Britain, for example. They've had thousands of years of basically terraforming the place in hedgerows and all this other stuff. So it's no longer active. In where I live, I've never seen the Columbia River in its natural format. I've grown up in an era of dams. So basically, the Columbia River is a long series of little lakes that go all the way upstream until you hit up to Pasco and that. And you got boats and that can go up and down through the canal system. We have no idea what the original place looked like. But everything that was theoretically connected to that, the Colorado River is another case where they now have to start debating the issue of letting water run downstream more, because otherwise the damn places are silting up, and there's nothing they can do about it because they don't have much water flow. So the extent to which we may be creating unpleasant after effects that you can only find out after it's too late to stop it means that you want to be really careful. In the same way of introducing genetically modified crops or any of these other things is not necessarily good or bad, but you really got to think about the consequences of stuff because of all the unintended consequences of things.
Oh, my next YouTube video is going to be on GMOs, so look forward to that, guys.
Yeah, I'm not intrinsically opposed to it. We've been genetically modifying crops for the last 10,000 years, but now we can do it a little more directly. But always you want to be careful because of all those potential unintended side effects.
I will be talking about that pink grapefruit. That is right, Pseudo. That's one of the topics I will be discussing.
You gotta love atomic gardening.
Well, we've meddled with ourselves from the beginning, and we're already stuck on that. That was part of the point that James Burke was making in the Connection series, that we've gone past the Rubicon of thinking, oh, can we avoid interfering with our environment? We've done it. And all of us who wear glasses, and all of us who live in houses with heating, and all of us who have cell phones that make plastic and they're based on silicon chips, and all of them will require electric power grids to sustain. Excuse me, we've already gone down that road. So we ain't going to go back to hunter-gatherers without electronics unless an electromagnetic pulse hits us from an atomic war, or a big solar burst comes along and blasts the atmosphere away, in which case we probably have more concerns than whether or not we're going to have cell phone service.
Hey, James, imagine the first early farmers and hunter-gatherers who found bananas. The thoughts running through their heads of, these things are rather awkwardly shaped. They're kind of hard to see. What if they were kind of like long and curved and were yellow? That'd be better.
I don't know. I think it's weird.
And plus their possible utility as a sexual implement.
I think it's really crazy whoever came up with the idea that it'd be a good thing to eat eggs. Who would ever?
Oh yeah.
Oh no, that was on a
bet. Comedian. I can't think of his name offhand. He was a comedian way before most of you were born, back in the 70s and that. And he would do David Brenner, and he would say, "Who is the first guy that comes into the village and says, 'Look at what dropped out of a bird. I'm going to eat it.'"
Exactly.
So now I have a question while you're at it. So who came up with the idea to pick? I think it's I don't know if it's a vegetable or a fruit, but pick the seeds out of that, roast those, then grind them up, then pour boiling hot water over them. And there's another one I like even better.
The one they run through the cat?
Yes, have it run through the cat.
Yeah, let the cat eat the stuff first and poop it out, and then you roast it.
And then you roast it and you drink it, because
those are actually genuinely interesting issues as to how foods develop, why we've gone through this. Is another reason of why certain cultures don't eat pork or not. What kind of practical folk legends originated around it. I also remember Bob Newhart's hilarious routine. There's probably a reason why I never became a smoker. He would do this back in the 1960s, where he would do a telephone. All he would do would be sitting on a stage on a bench with a telephone in his hand. and he would be talking to somebody on the telephone. In this case, he was talking to Sir Walter Raleigh. And so supposedly he's having this conversation back in the 1700s. And Raleigh is 1600s. And Raleigh is explaining the new thing he's found, tobacco. And so all you're getting is Bob Newhart's side of the conversation. So saying, oh, you found this stuff. Well, it's tobacco. Okay. Oh, the Indians love it. Okay. What do they do? Okay. You roll it up. Okay. Into a tube. Right. Okay. You stick it in your mouth. Right. Right. Yep. And you set fire to it. Walt, is this really a good idea? When you heard it described that way, you realize, how the hell did people do any of these things? But it must have happened. There was a human context in which people did stuff. Probably some of it was the weird guy that's going to try everything. The person that now ends up on Jackass videos would go around and literally eat anything that drops out of anything and turn anything on fire and all of that. And there must have been people like that all through the history of life, and it's probably the reason why we have the food and culture that we do.
Actually, James, if you think about another way, we were not the ones who ate the first eggs. If you think of it that way. In our evolution, something in our past has always been eating eggs. We just kept doing it.
Oh, yeah. We're going all the way through the hominids, and it's still an interesting issue as to when meat eating popped up in the hominids, and what kind of diets everybody has, and whether or not one of the reasons why the Neanderthals checked out is they didn't have quite the same eating habits and hunting habits as the successful
Cro-Magnons. That early hominid eating eggs is we figured out a way to make a souffle out of them.
And of course, as we all know, the entire purpose of the egg was to allow souffles. This is the intelligent design view of reality.
Well, I stopped following it, but I followed a Twitter account for a long time that had American warning labels, just tweeting American warning labels. So I think I came up with a way how we got all these strange things, because if some of the warnings on American warning labels at least make you think, there has to have been one idiot that actually tried it, because now it's on a warning label. So
oh Peter, there's a law in America that says you can't walk backwards with an ice cream sandwich in your back pocket.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, you wonder how some of those things, what weird incidents, and some of the stuff is actually kind of practical. One of them that I had mentioned along the way in the old tip book that always intrigued me was the fact that Plato was complaining, don't eat beans. And it turns out that about half of the European population has an allele where beans are actually bad for you. They're terrible. You can go into all sorts of reaction shocks because of this particular point mutation that had happened. So, you know, it depends on where you live.
Well, guys, I guess we should probably wrap it up. It's been about an hour.
Yes, we'd like to thank Robert Prothero for his wonderful appearance here. And
I'd like to thank all you guys for showing up, and I'd like to thank everyone in the chat for coming also and asking these interesting questions and having a nice chat with us.
I hope we answered them.
And I want to thank BJ, because as always she helped out again. So thanks, BJ.
All right. Well,
keep us posted.
Thank you.
Should Prothero reschedule? He could have been struck by lightning. There may be all sorts of circumstances that could cause that sort of thing to happen. Or he could have been the only one that got raptured. Boy, wouldn't that piss some people off?
Oh my goodness! I just got an email from him. I just got an email from him.
Report on that before you shut off.
Friday at 6 is fine.
Okay.
I emailed him.
That's
2 minutes
before
ago.
a Strikes thing, so that'll work out.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm excited then, and I will see all of you.
Is that next Friday or
maybe this Friday? Or tomorrow?
And that's 6 p.m. Central or 6 p.m. What's it?
Or that's 6 p.m. his time, which is 8 p.m. Central time. Sorry about that.
So that's CC's in the same time zone I am.
Yes, 8 p.m. Central time. Okay, so.
Okie dokie. We have to make sure this is clear because some of us are chronologically challenged.
It's okay. I am too. I'm always late to things. So, anyways, all right. Well, thank you very much, guys, and I'm going to end the stream. So, bye, everybody.
Bye.